It all began with a leak, an anonymous memo that found its way to the National Tribune, a right-leaning outlet with a reputation for explosive exclusives. The memo alleged that Chief Justice John Roberts had quietly backed a federal judge's efforts to pressure lower courts into aligning with executive directives, allegedly compromising judicial independence in favor of political expediency. The judge in question, Stephen K. Mallory, a relatively unknown but fiercely ambitious appointee in the D.C. Circuit Court. The memo's language was damning: coordination with the chief is secure. Autonomy is secondary to continuity of governance. By the time Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General turned rising conservative firebrand, got her hands on the memo, it was already making rounds on Capitol Hill. But Bondi wasn't interested in headlines. She wanted action. And unlike most, she had the leverage to do something about it. As chair of the newly empowered Judicial Integrity Council, a watchdog committee formed after recent court scandals, Bondi had subpoena power. She also had a loyal media network, a war chest, and one clear advantage: she wasn't afraid of anyone. Not even John Roberts. This is no longer about ideology, Bondi said during a late-night interview on Newsfront. This is about corruption, collusion, and the slow poisoning of judicial independence. And I intend to cut the toxin out at the root. The next morning, Judge Mallory was issued a formal inquiry notice. Within hours, Roberts canceled a scheduled appearance at Yale. And behind closed doors in the Supreme Court, panic set in. Judge Stephen K. Mallory arrived at the Judicial Integrity Council chambers with the quiet arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Dressed immaculately, he smirked through cameras flashing outside the building as if this were just another formality. It wasn't. Pam Bondi had converted a stale hearing room into a de facto war zone. American flags loomed larger than usual behind her. A digital projection of the leaked memo glared above the panel. Every seat was filled. The public wanted blood, or at least answers. Bondi began the proceedings calmly. Judge Mallory, she said, you've been accused of directly coordinating with the Chief Justice of the United States to influence the ideological posture of lower courts. Do you deny these allegations? Mallory's smile faltered just slightly. I deny any impropriety. Judges speak. That's not illegal. Bondi leaned forward. It's not illegal to talk. But it is illegal to manipulate the autonomy of the judiciary to serve political ends. So let me ask again, under oath, did Chief Justice Roberts urge you to pressure decisions favorable to the executive branch? A long pause. I decline to answer on the basis of judicial privilege, Mallory said. Gasps broke out in the room. Pam didn't blink. Then we subpoena your communications, she said, signaling her legal aid. Emails, texts, encrypted calls. We'll find out if the chief is shielding corruption in the name of protocol. That night, news broke that the council had issued an unprecedented subpoena to the Chief Justice's private communications. Cable news exploded. Some accused Bondi of staging a constitutional crisis. Others called her a patriot. But one thing was clear: for the first time in his career, John Roberts was no longer above the storm. Behind the polished marble of the Supreme Court, chaos was erupting in whispers. Chief Justice John Roberts hadn't spoken publicly since the memo leak, but inside the court, aides were shredding calendars, canceling meetings, and freezing digital records. One clerk reportedly quit mid-shift. Another was escorted out after attempting to copy internal documents to a flash drive. Roberts knew what was coming. The subpoena wasn't just a threat, it was a fuse. The official story was that his personal phone had been compromised, explaining his lack of cooperation with the Judicial Integrity Council. But insiders leaked that Roberts had already lawyered up, hiring Michael K. Tranner, a quiet but feared D.C. fixer known for two things: avoiding press, and burying scandals. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi wasn't letting up. She took to the airwaves again, this time holding up a printed email allegedly from Roberts to Mallory, marked April 19, 2024. I've spoken to the solicitor. Mallory's court must align. We cannot afford dissent in optics. Handle it quietly. Bondi didn't scream. She didn't need to. The highest judicial officer in this country appears to have demanded ideological loyalty, by bypassing precedent, protocol, and public trust, she said calmly. This isn't just unethical. It's historic. The White House, cautious until now, finally issued a statement: "We trust the judiciary to resolve this matter independently." Translation: You're on your own, Chief. Within 48 hours, 2 senators, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, issued a bipartisan call for an internal ethics review of Roberts himself. Inside the court, Roberts stopped attending in-person conferences. Bondi, meanwhile, filed an emergency motion to suspend Judge Mallory from the bench pending full investigation. The dominoes were falling. But the real question was, who else knew? And how far would Roberts go to keep them quiet? While the headlines buzzed with legal jargon and constitutional analysis, Pam Bondi's investigators were quietly tracing a paper trail, one that had nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with money. $2.4 million. That was the amount flagged by an internal whistleblower at the office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The sum had moved from a shell consulting firm in Delaware to a non-profit called Judicial Forward Initiative, co-founded by none other than Judge Stephen Mallory. The transfer happened exactly 3 weeks after a controversial ruling by Mallory's court that favored emergency executive powers in a regulatory freeze, a case that had allegedly caught Roberts' personal attention. And then came the real bombshell: the Delaware firm's registered agent had links to a private trust, managed by a Roberts family investment advisor. Bondi didn't waste a second. In a televised address, she laid it all out: this isn't just about corruption. It's about coordination, cash, and control. A Chief Justice with financial connections to a judge he was allegedly directing? That's not optics, that's obstruction. Roberts' defenders tried to spin. This is guilt by association, said one constitutional scholar on PBS. There's no direct evidence the chief benefited. But behind the scenes, the Supreme Court's Administrative Council went into lockdown. Staffers were placed under gag orders. External press liaisons were suspended. One justice, rumored to be Justice Alito, requested an emergency meeting of the court to discuss continuity of leadership. At the same time, Bondi's team filed a recommendation to Congress: begin formal proceedings to censure the Chief Justice. It was unprecedented. It was nuclear. And still, Bondi wasn't finished. "I want to know how deep this goes," she told reporters. "And I want to know who else was in that circle." Roberts didn't do this alone. By week's end, Judge Mallory was formally suspended, and Roberts had gone dark. The betrayal came from someone no one expected. Justice Elena Harlow, the court's most elusive swing vote, rarely appeared in interviews and barely left a footprint outside chambers. But when her name was linked to an encrypted message cache found on Judge Mallory's seized phone, everything changed. The cache contained a document titled Judicial Strategy, Backchannel Plan, timestamped and tagged with initials, JR, SM, and EH. Pam Bondi's team got a court order to decrypt the messages. Inside, a detailed, four-tiered framework for shaping judicial tone across appellate courts over the next 3 years, carefully worded to avoid detection. Phrases like, suggest consistency, preserve the majority's spirit, and anticipate alignment on executive junction cases, screamed coordinated bias. Bondi called an emergency hearing. This time, she didn't address the media first. She walked into the chamber, dropped the file on the table, and went live from the floor. "We now have documented evidence that a sitting Supreme Court justice was involved in off-the-record planning with a federal judge, both potentially under the direction of the Chief Justice." Harlow, through her legal counsel, denied wrongdoing but admitted the initials were hers. "Context matters," her attorney said. "These were academic discussions, not directives." Bondi wasn't having it. When a justice and a lower court judge share encrypted plans tied to the chief's financial orbit, that's not academia. That's conspiracy. Pressure mounted. Inside the Supreme Court, Roberts reportedly offered to temporarily recuse himself from internal ethics discussions, an unprecedented, desperate move. But Bondi made her next move before he could act. She leaked a judiciary oversight memo recommending criminal referrals for both Mallory and any sitting justice found to have engaged in backchannel influence. It wasn't just about removal anymore. It was about prosecution. And if John Roberts had any moves left, they were shrinking by the hour. The West Wing hadn't spoken to Pam Bondi directly, yet. But after the leak of the Judiciary Oversight Memo recommending criminal referrals, the President's Chief of Staff made an unannounced appearance on Capitol Hill. Cameras caught him stepping out of a black Suburban. No press briefing. No entourage. Just one folder under his arm, stamped, Confidential, Executive Legal Review. Inside that folder, a draft of a statement from the President, carefully worded, fully vetted, but explosive in its implications. If it is found that a sitting Chief Justice has compromised judicial autonomy, we must consider the constitutional remedies available to Congress, including impeachment. The statement wasn't released, yet. But Bondi had already heard whispers from her contacts in the Office of Legal Counsel. It was clear, the White House was preparing to sacrifice Roberts if it meant avoiding a constitutional standoff. At the same time, internal polls showed the public mood shifting. A majority of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, now favored an independent investigation into judicial corruption at the highest levels. Roberts, once the untouchable centrist steward of the court, was now a liability. Behind closed doors, Supreme Court justices reportedly met without him for the first time in modern history. Sources claim Justice Barrett broke the silence. We need to protect the institution, even if it means losing its head. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi made the boldest move yet. She publicly called for the Chief Justice to step down voluntarily, or face a formal House-led impeachment referral. The credibility of the court must outlast the careers of its members, she said, standing on the Capitol steps. No judge, no justice, no chief is immune to the truth. And then, something unexpected happened. That night, a heavily redacted internal memo from the National Security Council was leaked, dated 6 months before the scandal broke. It hinted at prior, executive-level concern regarding the integrity of judicial coordination, naming Roberts, and referencing quiet briefings at the highest level. The Oval Office wasn't just reacting. It had seen this storm coming. April 17, 10:03 a.m. The House Judiciary Committee convened in emergency session. The nameplate at the center of the docket read, Draft Articles of Impeachment, Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. It was real. And it was historic. Pam Bondi, now functioning less like an investigator and more like a shadow attorney general, entered the chamber with 2 thick binders, one labeled Communications, the other Financial Networking. Inside them were the final nails. The communications binder included a string of signal messages traced to a burner phone used by Judge Mallory, messages referencing senior approval for timing decisions related to executive litigation. One message simply read, JGR says delay is preferable, maintain majority integrity. The financial binder, even worse, contained flow charts tying offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands to the same Delaware consulting firm that wired Mallory his consulting fees. The final node in the diagram, a trust titled Green Rose Holdings, partially administered by a longtime Roberts family accountant. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. The Judiciary Committee chair, an old-school moderate with a penchant for constitutional originalism, cleared his throat and read aloud, "We, the undersigned, find sufficient cause to initiate proceedings to remove the Chief Justice of the United States for breach of judicial oath, ethical compromise, and obstruction of judicial independence." Reporters broke the news in real time. Stock markets shook. Law schools across the country suspended classes for public forums. Foreign outlets ran the headline in all caps, America moves to impeach ITS Chief Justice. Meanwhile, inside the Supreme Court, John Roberts reportedly refused to resign. He released a brief statement from chambers: "The allegations against me are politically motivated and factually distorted. I have served with integrity and will continue to do so." Pam Bondi's response: "Integrity doesn't happen in secret." And then, the unexpected twist. A federal marshal, under order from the Judicial Integrity Council, served Roberts with a court summons, not for criminal charges yet, but for sworn testimony in open session. The date was set, May 3rd. And when Roberts takes that seat under oath, Pam Bondi will be sitting just 10 feet across from him. May 3rd, 9:58 a.m., the chamber was at maximum capacity. Press credentials had been rationed. Security swept every corner. Metal detectors. Sniff dogs. Barricades. And then, at precisely 10 a.m., Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. walked into the room. No robe. No entourage. Just a gray suit, tight-lipped expression, and visible tension behind the eyes. He sat, adjusted the microphone, and faced the Judiciary Oversight Committee, led by none other than Pam Bondi, who sat like a prosecutor prepared to dismantle a legacy. The oath was brief. The silence afterward? Deafening. "Chief Justice Roberts," Bondi began, "have you ever instructed a lower court judge to align their decisions with the executive branch?" "No," Roberts replied, voice measured. "I have not." "Have you ever communicated with Judge Stephen Mallory regarding the outcome or timing of politically sensitive cases?" "I have offered general guidance on procedural matters, not outcomes." Bondi leaned in, holding up an enlarged image of a signal transcript from Mallory's phone. It showed, "JGR prefers delay, maintain majority integrity." "Is that you?" Bondi asked, flatly. A pause. Roberts exhaled. "Yes. That is my message." Gasps echoed through the room. Reporters live-tweeted as fingers flew over keyboards. "But I did not intend manipulation. I meant to advise caution, not outcome." Bondi raised a second exhibit, a wire transfer record showing a Roberts-connected trust funneling money indirectly to the Judicial Forward Initiative. "Did you know that your family trust was funding a nonprofit tied to a judge under your influence?" "I was not aware of the specifics," Roberts replied, now clearly sweating. Bondi pressed harder. "So you're claiming the Chief Justice of the United States was unaware that money from his household was being funneled into an organization run by a subordinate he was privately advising on case strategy?" Roberts shifted in his seat. "I delegated the trust's management. I did not approve the disbursements personally." "Delegation doesn't excuse corruption," Bondi snapped. "It just hides it better." The room held its breath. Later in the session, a closed-door segment was initiated to discuss classified elements of the National Security Council memo, the one referencing executive-level concern. But before the doors closed, Bondi left the public with a final line: "This isn't about partisan lines or legal gray zones. It's about power, unchecked, unaccountable, and now exposed." As Roberts was escorted from the hearing, his expression was unreadable. But one thing was clear: his days as Chief Justice were numbered. May 9, 8:12 a.m., before most reporters had finished their coffee, a statement appeared on the Supreme Court's official website. No seal. No fanfare. Just 15 words: "Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. has submitted his resignation, effective immediately." No further comment. It hit Washington like a missile. Bondi's office confirmed it moments later. Roberts had quietly stepped down, citing irreconcilable damage to institutional trust, in a personal letter delivered overnight to the President and both chambers of Congress. He had jumped, before he could be pushed. The Judiciary Committee shelved the impeachment vote. The Justice Department announced a formal investigation into financial misconduct, now freed from the constraints of judicial immunity. Federal agents visited the headquarters of Judicial Forward Initiative the same afternoon. Mallory's assets were frozen. His law license suspended. Bondi, meanwhile, addressed the nation one last time: "We did not pursue power. We pursued truth. And today, justice begins to breathe again." Across the country, headlines screamed, "First resignation of a Chief Justice in U.S. history. Pam Bondi, the woman who took down the court's king." But not everyone cheered. Some feared the precedent. Others warned of judicial chaos. A few accused Bondi of orchestrating a political coup under the guise of ethics. But Bondi didn't flinch. She turned her focus to proposing a Judicial Transparency Act, mandating financial disclosures for justices, third-party trust audits, and encrypted communication bans. She wasn't finished cleaning house. As for Roberts, his last known public appearance was at a private residence in Maine, escorted by U.S. Marshals, his face pale, his legacy shattered. One former clerk described him simply: "A man who built an empire of neutrality, only to die in the center of a fire he thought he controlled." And the Supreme Court? It stood. Bruised, scorched, but intact. Justice David M. Carlisle, the court's senior-most associate, was sworn in as acting Chief Justice the following week. The marble steps of the court remained silent. But beneath them, something fundamental had shifted. The age of silent robes was over. And Pam Bondi had lit the match.